I'm Pamela Brown along with Dana, and you are watching CNN's special coverage of former Vice President Dick Cheney's funeral. Right now, attendees are arriving at the Washington National Cathedral for services will begin next. Cheney, remembered as America's most powerful modern vice president, died this month at the age of 84. He was the chief architect of the War on Terror and helped lead the U.S. into the Iraq War under President George W. Bush, and much later, Cheney broke with many in his awe when he, along with his daughter then Congresswoman Liz Cheney, condemned President Trump's challenges to the 2020 election, leaving Dick Cheney and Democrats in a place no one ever anticipated. Political allies. Now, neither President Trump nor Vice President Vance was invited to Cheney's funeral, but other living vice presidents. 4 of them will attend, along with former President Bush and Biden. Of course, Biden, also a former vice president. Let's go live now to CNN Chief National Affairs Correspondent Jeff Zeleny at the National Cathedral here in Washington. And, Jeff, I see there you're joined by an important funeral attendee, former Vice President Mike Pence. Good morning. Good morning, Pamela and Dan. As we the nation gathers to mourn and remember Vice President Dick, we are here with former Vice President Mike Pence. Thank you very much for joining, President. How do you believe President Cheney will be remembered in history? Well, I think Vice President Dick Cheney is going to be remembered as an American patriot, but an extraordinary public servant when you think of a lifetime that spanned in not only service in Congress where he was in leadership, but being one of the youngest chiefs of staff for President Gerald Ford, going on to being the Secretary of Defense for President George Herbert Walker Bush, and of course, Vice President for President George W. Bush. I mean, there are very few who have served at such levels with such distinction as Dick Ch. But I think more than that, Jeff, I think he will be remembered as a man who was there at critical moment in the life of the nation in the wake of Watergate. We had President Gerald Ford, who made that hard decision, to pardon President Nixon and move the country forward to a time to heal. Dick Cheney was there as his chief of staff, Operation Desert Storm, under President George Herbert Walker Bush, or where he was Secretary of Def in an extraordinary American military victory. And then, of course, being there on September 11th, a day those of us who were serving in Washington at the time will never forget. I believe his steady hand through all those years contributed mightily to the life of the nation, and he'll be remembered and honored for that. As you walked through his time of service here in Washington, it's extraordinary. From the 70s, the youngest White House Chief of Staff, to the 80s, a member of Congress from Wyoming, Defense Secretary in the 90s, and the Vice President in the 20s. There's really no one in history who has that a trajectory, but you have one that is similar in terms of serving in Congress and the Vice Presidency. What did he tell you when you were on the cusp of taking office? About what that role was like and how to embrace it, and how did he change it? Well, I think he did change it in many ways. The critics of the Bush administration like to exaggerate his role. But there's no question in my mind that throughout those 8 years he was a steady hand and a support to President George W. Bush, who we'll hear from today. Oh, I'm sure we will extol the virtues of his as a vice president. But to your point, Jeff, right after we were elected in 2016, an election that Vice P. Cheney strongly supported, and we were grateful for that, he called me up and gave me some very sage advice. What did he tell you? Well, he actually first told me his practice was to take his presidential daily brief first thing in the morning at the vice president's residence before joining the president for his presidential daily brief, and I made that my practice, literally every day. For 4 years. And it was a way that he said, you will be better equipped to be able to advise the president, if you know in advance what's can run that through the filter of the president's priorities. And secondly, he did encourage him to spend a lot of time on Capitol, which was easy for me as he was a member of Congress, for he was the Republican conference chairman, which was a role that I served. But he was the one that said to don't just go to Capitol Hill when the administration is looking for something or looking for a vote. Go on a regular basis, which I sought to do for those regular luncheons in Senate. And I'll never forget, those were 2 pieces of advice that I think contributed to the success of their administration. And I know they contributed to the success of ours, as we all well remember a year of broke ranks with the party, and he supported Vice President Harris in her presidential bid at the T. He did so. He said that there was no grave threat to the republic. Then Donna, do you think his words have come well? Look, I have great confide in the future of this country, and great confidence in the strength of our republic. I would never begrudge the late Vice PR his opinions or political judgment, but at the end of the day, I think his lifetime is evidence of the fact of really the strength of this nation. And in a very real sense as we go forward, I think people will continue to be inspired by his devotion to our military, his devotion to our national def and a lifetime of service. And that's where we should focus. He also warned about what U.S. allies abroad would think about the changes in I'm wondering, as we saw this week with President Trump sitting alongside the Saudi Crown Prince, talking about the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, President Trump saw things happen. What did you think when you hear? Well, I looked on at that and obviously look, one of the things that Dick Cheney understood that I understood as vice president, is that any president has to take the world as it come and the opportunity to move forward with Saudi Arabia in the hopes that Saudi Arabia will someday even join the Abraham Accords that we mentioned during our administration. I think this is understandable. But one of the things, as I just returned from a swing through the United Kingdom, one of the things about Vice President Cheney's long career was the bell in the importance of those long-term alliances, particularly with our NATO allies. And, as we did in our time, he did in his time calling on our NATO allies to live up to their obligations. But what message does that send to the NATO allies when President Trump said something like that? Well, I believe that, the clarity with which the Prezi will speak in the days ahead, must include our commitment to stand with free nations around the world and especially those who have helped us build this extraordinary transatlantic alliance. It's important that we continue to advance peace in the Middle East. It's important that we make it see to our allies in the Asia-Pacific that we will stand up for freedom. But in the days ahead, hope the President will continue to reiterate our strong commitment not only to peace in Eastern Europe as Russia continues to prosecute its unprovoked and brutal invasion of Ukraine, but also ultimately to strengthen the alliances that have served the cause of peace and security in the world. That's what with Dick Cheney's great legacy, I believe in many respects, was that bulwark of freedom literally in this country with a strong national defense. You know, I don't think it is an accident that we haven't had terrorist event happen on our shores since September 11, 2001. I think it was the strong leader President Bush provided his successors, provided our administration, provided to invest in our national defense, and I honestly think that will be Vice President Cheney's great legacy is support for our military and support for our national sec at home and abroad. He said country over party. That was one of his closing messages over the last why. As you prepared to take your seat in the cathedral, there will be a tapestry of Republicans and Democrats. Speaker Boehner, Speaker Pelosi, President Biden, former Vice President to Quayle. What does this moment say? Do you believe and can the country move beyond the bitter divide that it's now in? Oh, I'm confident. It can. Look, our politics are more divided than any time in my lifetime, but I'm not convinced the American people are as divided as our politics. The American people, I think, as you will see today, with the turnout here at the National Cathedral, admire and respect men and women who step forward either to put on the uniform of the United States, the uniform of law enforcement, or be in public life. And I think that the honor that will be paid to the life and legacy of our 46th Vice President, will give evidence of those share that we have in this country. And on that foundation of shared I'm very confident that we'll continue to move our country forward. Toge Vice President, thank you very much for your Tim, thank you. All right, and Pamela and Dana, as the service begins in the calm, President George W. Bush will be delivering a eulogy as well as, of course, Liz Cheney, the former vice president's dog, as well as some grandchildren. So the service will be getting you later this hour. Back to you. All right. Thank you so much, Ja, and thank you so much, Mr. Vice President, for that really interesting conversation.